In a peaceful town nestled between towering mountains, there lived a wise old man named Arthur. His modest cabin stood on the outskirts of the village, and each evening he would sit on his porch in a rocking chair, gazing at the empty chair beside him. The townspeople often whispered about him, wondering why he kept the chair there. Some thought he was lonely, while others believed he was waiting for someone, but Arthur never spoke of the reason. He remained quiet, allowing his mysterious habit to spark curiosity and wonder in the hearts of those who passed by. Years passed, and no one ever dared to ask Arthur about the chair. The village continued its usual rhythms, and people came and went, but the empty chair remained on the porch day after day. One chilly autumn evening, as the sun began to dip behind the mountains, a young man named Ryan arrived in the village. He was a traveler, tired from a long journey, his clothes covered in dust and his face weathered from the road. Seeking shelter, he knocked on Arthur's door. Arthur opened it with a warm smile, immediately recognizing the exhaustion in Ryan's eyes. "Come in, young man," Arthur said kindly, ushering Ryan inside. "You look like you could use some rest." Without hesitation, Ryan stepped into the cabin, glad for the warmth and refuge from the cold evening air. Arthur offered him a place by the fire, and soon Ryan was seated, feeling the warmth of the flames as they danced in the hearth. As Ryan sat there, his gaze wandered around the room. The cabin was cozy, with simple wooden furnishings and a fire that crackled softly. But what caught his attention was the empty rocking chair beside Arthur. It sat there, still and waiting, beside Arthur's own chair by the fire. Ryan's curiosity got the better of him, and he asked, "Is someone expected?" "That chair? It's been there the entire time I've been here. Is someone joining us tonight?" Arthur looked over at the empty chair and smiled softly. His eyes, filled with both sadness and a deep wisdom, met Ryan's. "That chair," he said gently, "is reserved for someone special." He paused as though weighing whether or not to share more. "Would you like to hear the story behind it?" Ryan nodded, intrigued by the mystery that surrounded the chair. Arthur settled back in his own chair, his fingers resting lightly on the arms. He began to speak, his voice steady and calm, as though he had told this story many times before. "Many years ago," Arthur began, "when I was a young man, I had a close friend named Thomas. We were inseparable back then, brothers really. We shared dreams, laughter, and the occasional tear. We promised each other that no matter where life took us, we would always make time to visit one another and sit together, sharing stories and memories. Those were simpler days, days filled with hope and endless possibility." Arthur paused for a moment, his eyes lost in the distant past. As time passed, Thomas and I both grew older. Life took us in different directions. Thomas moved to a distant city to pursue work, and slowly, over the years, the letters we exchanged grew fewer and fewer. Eventually, we lost touch completely. I kept thinking that one day he would return, that he would honor the promise we made to each other. But as the years went by, I began to wonder if that day would ever come. Arthur's voice grew softer, a touch of sadness creeping in. "I kept this chair here, you see, because I believe that one day Thomas will come back. He will return to fulfill the promise we made. And when he does, this chair will be here, waiting for him, just as it has always been." Ryan listened intently, moved by the story. He thought about his own life, about the friends and family he had drifted away from. He realized how much time he had spent chasing goals, responsibilities, and ambitions, leaving little room for the relationships that once mattered most. The empty chair now felt like a symbol of all the bonds he had neglected over the years. "I think we all have an empty chair in our lives," Ryan said softly, his voice tinged with reflection. "People we've lost touch with, promises we've forgotten to keep, dreams we've left behind." Arthur nodded thoughtfully, his eyes never leaving the fire. "It's true," he replied. "We all have those empty chairs, those people we've let slip away, those promises we never quite kept. But it's never too late to reach out, to bridge the gap." Sometimes all it takes is a letter, a call, or even just a thought. Ryan thought about that for a moment. "Do you think Thomas will ever come back?" he asked quietly. Arthur smiled again, though there was a hint of melancholy in his expression. "I don't know," he said, "but I'll always leave the chair for him. And if he doesn't come, that's okay too. I'll know I kept my promise, and that's what matters." The next morning, before Ryan continued his travels, he watched Arthur write a letter. Arthur's handwriting was careful, each word chosen with care. As Ryan stood nearby, he saw Arthur pause for a moment before writing the final line. "Dear Thomas, it has been many years, but I still think of you often. If you ever pass through this village, know that my door is always open and your chair is waiting." Ryan watched with a sense of admiration. Arthur looked up from his letter and handed it to him. "If your travels ever take you near Thomas's city, will you deliver this for me?" Arthur asked. Ryan promised to do so and set out on his journey, the letter tucked carefully into his bag. Inspired by Arthur's story and his willingness to reconnect, Ryan began reaching out to his own friends and family members. He realized how much joy it brought him to reconnect with those he had lost touch with over the years. He sent letters, made calls, and began rebuilding relationships that had once seemed impossible to repair. It was amazing, he thought, how a simple message could bring people back together. Months later, Ryan returned to the village. He was no longer the same person who had arrived so many months ago. He had found peace in his heart and joy in his relationships, rekindling bonds with people he had long neglected. With a smile on his face and a letter in his hand, he walked up to Arthur's cabin once again. As he reached the door, he saw something that made his heart skip a beat. There, in the chair that had once been empty, sat Thomas. He was laughing, his face lighting up as Arthur spoke to him. The two old friends were reunited, just as Arthur had always believed they would be. The sight of them, sitting together once more, was a powerful reminder of the importance of keeping promises and cherishing the relationships that matter most. As the villagers walked past Arthur's cabin that evening, they saw the two men, side by side, both with smiles on their faces. The empty chair had been filled, and it was a symbol of hope, a reminder that it is never too late to make things right, to reach out, and to keep the promises we make. It was a message that would resonate with everyone in the village. Cherish your relationships, never leave a chair empty, and always keep your promises in your heart. So believe, grow, and inspire. Nothing can stop you. This story is to fuel your day. Thank you so much for watching, and stay blessed.